Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another podcast, and indeed, episode 10. Yes, we have finally made it, and I never thought in October we would get this far. I think we'll probably be taken down by then by what Penguin says in these podcasts. But, anyways, so yes, this is episode 10, and of course, I wanted to make this more of a special one, and which is why we have a very special guest. So, I'd like to welcome everyone to John D. Ruddy. Hello, my friend.
Hello, how are we doing?
Fine, thank you. And just for all the viewers at home, we'd like to say who you are, what you do, and as he is also another YouTuber.
Yes, indeed. I am a writer, actor, illustrator, YouTuber, all sorts of different things. I'm best known for my history series, Manny Man Does History, which you can find on YouTube. But most recently, and in relation to what we're talking about today, although I've been staying a little bit more in the past, I just released. I feel like a real YouTuber now because I finally made a video essay, and this
Ooh.
video essay has been 10 years in the making. It is about The Hobbit, and specifically the Hobbit films, and why it should have been two films instead of three, and how I recut it into two films. So you can go check that out on my second channel, John D. Ruddy Does Stuff, which is loads of fun.
And I will leave a link to all those channels, his YouTube channels, in the description below. And it's interesting that you mentioned those Hobbit films, as we have Ken here, who is a firm believer that there should be three movies, but that's a discussion for another day. But so also before, I know last week or a few weeks ago I forgot talking to you, so I'm going to start off with him. Hello, my friend.
Hey, it's good to be here like always. I'm Galifine and I've got a YouTube channel as well. Should be in the description. Yeah, I'm excited to be here for the 10th podcast.
Yep, as always, his links are in the description. I'm also joined by Enzo. Hello, my friend.
Hello, everybody.
Thanks for being here. And I was always joined by little angry Nikki.
Megavan and Melanine. I'm not that angry, come on.
Yeah, they sound really angry right there. Say you're angry, it's really nice. And as always, we're joined by number one villain, Chen.
Hi.
I thought that would be your new title. But anyway, so yes, as this is the 10th podcast for this, I thought, why not do a thing that people have waited for a long time now, which was, what are we actually going to see in the show, and how will we put forward a clear narrative for the second age and condense it into a 5-season show. So that is why we have John here today. So yes, we're lucky we have his expertise, and we also have Ken, who also I think is doing a master's or something in history as well. So yes, I don't. So we're gonna get right into it. So I remember from the synopsis released not long ago, I believe it was January now, it talked about the show starts in a relative time of peace. And so I want to go through everybody first, starting with John. What do you think would be a good start for the show for a relative time of peace for season 1 to start in?
I suppose, I mean, a relative time of peace. I've been looking at the whole timeline of the Second Age, and initially I wasn't even sure if I could break it down into 5 seasons, but I actually did. There is a
Ah.
solid 5 seasons in there, and we can explore that. But I mean, naturally, somewhere in the beginnings of the Second Age, you've just had the War of Wrath, in which half of the continent has literally been destroyed into the ocean. And so you've got an entire kind of a rediscovery where you've got the elves, the likes of Círdan and Gil-galad, taking the lead and establishing Lindon, the Grey Havens, and then so there's a lot of kind of, I suppose, discovery that you
Mm-hmm.
could explore with the elves, where they're finding their feet again in this new section of Middle Earth, which is no longer Beleriand that they were all living in the first stage,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of that kind of stuff that you could explore. Even maybe some of the some of the conflicts between, say, like the Sylvan elves, who, had been been in Mirkwood, and they're like, oh, so you're finally coming back from the fancy place over in Balerion, and they'll be like, yeah, it got destroyed in the War of Wrath. Were you not paying attention to all the dragons and stuff? But yeah, I mean, it is an interesting time for a lot of the characters, because you've also got the dwarves as well, leaving Nogrod, leaving Belagost, and coming to the Blue Mountains, coming to Moria. So it's quite intriguing that the audience could actually be brought in that similar way, where these kingdoms are new to the characters, and they can also be new to the audience as well, which I think would be quite a natural place to do it.
Indeed, and thank you for giving such well-detailed context to the start of the Second Age, because that is important, because when we are coming into this new show, even just for an average viewer, even for maybe a person who's even just watched or even read Lord of the Rings, I'm not sure a lot would know about what happened before, what's the context to the start of this show. But so yes, that is the start of the Second Age, really excellently summarized by John. So now we've got the interesting of, if we had to start the first few episodes, if you had to pin down a specific point in time, maybe a year, etc., what could that be? So Hen, do you have any ideas of where we could start?
I think we'll start much later than that. I don't think there's really anything particularly interesting from the point of view of a drama in the first, I don't know, 1,000, like well over 1,000 actually years of the Second Age. Yet there is good domestic drama with Aldarion and Erendis, but on a larger scale, not really. No, it would be the equivalent of something that was actually photographed for the Lord of the Rings, which would be, time-lapse footage of the Shire being built. Like you don't need it to tell the story. And I think the show will begin much later. I think I would put it somewhere like year 1,500 to the Second Age, when Anatar is already around. I think they'll fiddle with some of the finer points of the chronology. I don't think, because Anatar originally shows up like 2 centuries before that. Yeah. But I think like 1,500 years into the Second Age would be a good place to start.
I mean, to be quite honest, I would, I would take the timeline, and I hate to say it, but almost throw it out the window, or at least be prepared for it to be thrown out the window a little bit. I would imagine in this show you will see a lot of conflation, a lot of compacted timelines. I mean, the films, like the Lord of the Rings films, did a very good job for the most part, but even they played about with the timelines. But like, if you look at what they did in The Hobbit, where they're the White Council, and Elrond is talking about, we have had this hard won watchful peace. It's like, that watchful peace lasted 400 years, and the Greenwood had become Mirkwood over those 400 years, whereas they just condensed that into something that is digestible for an audience. It would be prepared for a lot of that same kind of stuff to happen in this show.
The main distinction here, I think, is that here the showrunners have to answer to the Tolkien estate, and I'm sure they have leeway, but in terms of like, I don't think that they can like collapse an entire like millennia down. They can do things to kind of heighten the immediacy of things, which is what the filmmakers did in the movies, basically. I
mean, they literally do that in the prologue of Lord of the Rings, where
it's a couple of 1,000 years, easily.
Yeah, like the One Ring is created, and then a last alliance of men and elves. It's like you've just skipped a lot of information there, folks. But that's tidy storytelling at the same time. But I know what you mean.
Do you think it's possible that at the start, Nikki, that we could have potentially in the first episode a quick prologue to what happened beforehand, and to some of the stuff that John Riley mentioned, like they did in the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely a possibility. Like, because If they skip all of that, they miss a potentially valuable establishing phase for some of the characters and some of the areas that they're going to be focusing on later on. So it could be a good idea to maybe start a little bit, just like, for instance, showing the foundation of Lindon, showing the foundation of Numenor, showing like little bits and pieces that explain the history that happened just before. I don't know how it's best to do it if they sort of just not like if they follow the Lord of the Rings and just don't acknowledge the fact that there's been years between then and that, or if they like show like kind of like a montage, they introduce some of the characters and then show like how it's changed, or if they do like then and then now, you know. But I definitely think we could see that. They have a lot of material that they can use over 5 seasons, but I still don't think if they start in the middle where Ren is suggesting they might start, I do agree that they probably will start there because that's where all the most exciting stuff happens. But it means that they will have to invent a lot more storylines within that to keep it interesting, to stretch it out, sort of, to have enough storylines to go on. That's what I think, anyway. As I was saying, I think in our first podcast, I kind of feel like they're going to start in Lindon and start telling like Galadriel and Gil-galad and all of those stories there before they start migrating, before things start happening. So, yeah.
I would disagree with what Hin said because I believe you said that you think that the show's going to start around the year 1500. According to the Tale of the Years, that's when the Elven Smiths reach the height of their power, which we're definitely going to see that in the show. I don't think anyone's questioning that, but I think it's got to start probably around the year 1200 or 1000. And it will probably also show a little bit of history in like a prologue of the years like 750 when Eregion was founded, and maybe we'll also see some backstory of Numenor and a little bit of Lindon as well. And really the big issue with the timeline that we have in the Tale of the Years is that in 750, Eregion is founded, and then in the year 1000, Sauron is alarmed by the growing power of the Númenóreans and chooses to dwell in Mordor. That's a huge, huge time gap for so little to happen. So that does make it really tricky. So that's why I think that the first 250, 350 years are probably just going to be summarized in a prologue or hinted at in the first few episodes because people need to know what happened. But you can't really have a full story start in those years, at least in my opinion.
The idea of a prologue, they can do it. It's very likely that they would do it. I think, we had so many prologues by now that maybe it would be good to try not to do it.
You
but
can make a movie
but
of
they
prologues.
could, yeah.
But still, you have to show some backstory to
But you
Eregion.
can also trickle it through.
And there are other ways to show that stuff other than a prologue. But what I'm saying is you have to show that stuff, but you at the same time you cannot start at the year 750 because then you're left with these crazy time gaps and what happened here and what happened there, and then you've got to make up a ton of stuff, or you have to like jump by hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah, looking at what the first episode of Game of Thrones did, for example, how it was able to establish so much in that very, very first episode, between geography, between characters, between relationships of characters, and like it did so much heavy lifting for the entire rest of the show that it would be interesting to see just if a first episode of this would be able to pull something like that off, and it didn't have a prologue.
Exactly. Good example.
I think it probably will be able to do something like that because it's going to be, now this, we don't know for sure, but we think it's going to be at least an hour long.
Indeed. And Enzo, what are your thoughts on that? How would you like to see a prologue, or maybe how John and Tolkien suggested to have a first episode which covers a lot, just like Game of Thrones episode?
I didn't watch Game of Thrones, so I don't really know what they are talking about. But I'm more on the prologue side of things. The difference is, I think me and Galafane disagree on what should be shown there.
I'm sorry if he's
Like I heard some people say, I heard someone speak about the War of Wrath, the establishment of Numenor, etc. I think this is way too far back in the timeline and doesn't concern nor does it affect the second age. The
so.
War of
I mean,
Wrath.
it's literally why they're living in that part of Middle Earth. But yeah,
No,
fair enough. I know
no.
what you mean.
The
That's
thing
a
is,
story for another time.
no. The thing is, the War of Wrath. The actors of the War of Wrath were the Vanyar, were the hosts of light, and Morgoth. None of whom appears in the second age. So showing it would be just showing a bunch of characters we don't know and we won't ever see again, just to say that there was a war before. In my opinion, if we start in the 1200s, we should get a prologue that is centered on Sauron rebuilding his power. That is, if we decide to show Sauron as a given, and probably showing Aldarion and Gil-galad letters, etc.
Yeah, you've touched
The
upon.
foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You've touched upon an interesting point, something I was actually going to mention as well. You actually indeed mentioned Aldarion. So him and his story is one of the most fan favorite things in the Second Age. But of course, it happens, I think, don't quote me on this, around the year 900 of the Second Age, around that time period, around the reign of Tarmanelda, when he went to Middle Earth there and back a few times. So, Nikki, would you like to see I think because even Penguin said that having maybe potentially moving Eldarion's story further forward into the year 1000 of the Second Age and intertwine storylines, could that be a possibility?
It could. But messing around too much with where things happen, and yeah, I don't know, I'd be careful with doing that, because there are, like, the most of the eyes that are on this show at the moment are people who already know everything or most of it and have read the books.
Mm-hmm.
So messing around too much could be a bit risky. You could risk losing a lot of people just on that.
But
But
didn't The Witcher do that
definitely, if they
as
do it
well?
right.
Yeah.
Sorry, what?
Didn't The Witcher try and do that in the first season, I believe?
Yeah, I don't really know that storyline well enough to say yes or no, but I heard
Neither
that
do
they did,
I.
yeah.
Yeah. John, from your experience, do you think it is possible we can have a story from the year 900 of the Second Age, put that into the year 1200 of the Second Age, about 400 years difference, but still be able to have it cohesive and a narrative storyline for a show?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, and the reality of it is, what Tolkien has written of the Second Age is an outline. Like the timeline that he included in the appendices of the Lord of the Rings and the various kind of supporting things, it is very scant in comparison to what we have for the Lord of the Rings, and um, and so there will always have to be a lot of invention, a lot of embellishment in those stories. But I think there is an advantage that, yes, the hardcore fans are going to know all of the ins and outs of this. And again, the hardcore fans are probably going to be annoyed about certain things. But at the same time, the general audience will only and this is the thing, they can't make this just for the hardcore fans. They have to make this for everyone. They have to. This is their biggest show. This is the biggest show ever. They have to get the Game of Thrones audience, which was the biggest watched show and the biggest pirated show of the world, and everybody was talking about it. This is their stab at making Game of Thrones, and what better property to do that than Lord of the Rings? The major issue I think that they may run into from a storytelling perspective is the general timeline, is the fact that interesting thing to happen is you could see centuries pass, but what that means is that you're not getting any long-running human characters. No Numenor. Well, I suppose the Numenorians do last a couple of 100 years anyway,
Yeah,
which
the dwarves.
actually works in our advantage. But there is a really interesting dynamic, which I think that we could see that in the space of each episode, perhaps we could have a time jump between each episode, and that you could see the
I like that.
the Númenóreans, who you met as a young man in the first episode, now in the second episode is now middle aged, and the elves are still ageless, and you can see the beginnings of that resentment that the Númenóreans have, that they see that, and you could really play about with that conflict where the elves are sitting there going, "You're so lucky, you get to die. We have to live on and see all of this slow but sure destruction of evil on Middle Earth. You get to die. You get to leave this mortal coil." And of course the Númenóreans are like, "But you get to live forever." So it's a wonderful automatic conflict in its very core. Which you could really explore. But to be quite honest, I'm not even sure if there's much room for the Númenóreans in the first season, possibly in most of the first 2 seasons from the way that I have it laid out.
Yeah, and you touched on many good points, and we'll get back to them in a second. But Talkative, do you have something to comment on?
Yeah, back to the issue of Aldarion and Erendis, their story being told in the year 1000 of the Second Age. I don't think that really establishes that much, because the only reason you would want to shift their storyline forward is to maybe have some involvement with the main plot, which is, as far as we know, the making of the rings. Really, every bit of evidence we have so far is that it's all about the forging of the rings and what comes of it. But, of course, we have to show backstory to that. But Aldarion and Erendis are just so utterly disconnected from the forging of the rings in so many ways that I don't really see why they would overturn what we see in the canon just to have them linked into the main story. Besides, even if they are both alive, let's say from the year 1000 to 1200, because we're probably not going to see them being born, especially if they do move it forward, then they're still dead before the forging of the rings, and it's kind of pointless. I definitely think we need to have at least 2 Númenórean side plots, like with the Battle of the Gwathlo. We need to see Numenor. It's very important. But I think particularly early on, I don't see much point in shifting the story of Aldarion and Erendis.
Yeah, exactly.
Fair enough. And just I want to quickly touch back on what John said. I think I found really interesting was seeing that dynamic play between all the elves. They're immortal, but the men, even though they have the gift of long life, the gift of the valor, they are still mortal. And maybe seeing that play off maybe throughout the years of the show as well, seeing the aging Númenóreans, but at the same time, Galadriel still probably can be on the Time magazine, anything, she still look fine. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see that dynamic, and also the biggest pirated show for Game of Thrones. I was thinking once that you have Lord of the Rings on Prime, the name. It'd be so easy just for someone to put like Lord of the Rings on 123 movies and just play with that name, or some just pirated thing. So yeah, I hope I'm not advocating watching pirated shows anyways, but moving on now. So we got to the final point, which is we're about 25 minutes in, and we need to know where are we starting the show confirmed. So John touched upon earlier around the year, not really around, but gave us some context around the start of the show and what context we need going into that first episode. Then Hen proposed the idea of going around the year 1500 of the Second Age. Then I believe Enzo, I think Galifane as well, want to push it back a bit more. The year 1200 of the Second Age is a relative time of peace, because yes, I want to go back to that saying in the prologue, the show will start in a relative time of peace. So, and I think I've mentioned everyone's name there except from Nikki. For your proposal, do you think the year 1200 of the Second Age is a good enough start point for this show to begin with?
I think it should start a little earlier. I think it should start around year maybe 500.
Fair enough. Year
At
500.
At least to 1,000 at the very latest, year 1,000.
What do you think, Hen? Did you think that's early enough?
I think that's much too early. Because again, you have the limiting factor of the longevity of the human and dwarven characters, which is like what, 300 years? And I think the whole of the show really needs to take place in no longer than one Numenorian time span for it to be even remote, all 5 seasons, for it to even remotely be compelling from a dramatic point of view as a character story. So yeah.
So I think and John, unless you have anything else to add.
Well, on that note of condensing everything into one Numenorian lifespan, I think you have a wonderful opportunity that each season you have your constant elven cast, but you're actually able to refresh your Numenorian cast. Sort of almost like Doctor Who or American Horror Story, where even though that's the same cast, they're all different characters. You get the opportunity as a storyteller to refresh things, and if there is something maybe that ultimately didn't work in season 1 in Numenor, you're like, oh, that's okay, because it's going to be an entirely new cast in season 2, and I think that's a wonderful opportunity, a wonderful a really interesting way of telling a story. I genuinely think season 1, the final shot of season 1, will be the letters forming on the One Ring. I think all roads will lead to the forging of the rings. And I think that's the final shot, because that's how you hook your audience to watch season 2, is to have Sauron forging the One Ring. And that is your last shot. And everyone is going, oh my God, I'm watching season 2. Because that would be really cool. That's what the average audience knows. That's what they're familiar with. They have seen Lord of the Rings, and not only that, but the show is still called The Lord of the Rings, and here we are seeing Sauron become the Lord of the Rings, and that is what the whole first season is about. And from then on, you're like, this is why it's called Lord of the Rings, because he is literally the Lord of the Rings.
It is. That's exactly my point, actually, which is that we have to the show has to be about the story of the rings for it to kind of live up to the title.
Yeah,
I do absolutely think just the working title is still.
It could be, but I won't be surprised.
It's not going to be Lord of the Rings on Prime. It's going to be something else, but it could be the Lord of the Rings, or it could be something else.
The Lord of the Rings, and then subtitle of some kind.
Yeah,
it's going to be the Lord of the Rings subtitle of some kind, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's the selling point. People if you were to say anything other than Lord of the Rings, people were like, wow. It needs to be Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings. It's my favorite film.
Yeah, if the Second Age stuff wasn't part of the Lord of the Rings brand, then Amazon simply would not have bought it. So
like if you were to call it a
get rid of the title of the Lord of the Rings, then you're just left with a story in their eyes. Yeah, it's a good story, but it's just a story.
So I think,
and I do agree.
Yeah, go on, Ken. Before I finish off,
I was just saying I have always thought that the making of the actual One Ring and a good close up of it would be a good season finale. I don't know first season, but for sure it's a good season finale somewhere in there.
I'd also like to add want to draw it out too long either.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Throughout 5 of the Lord of the Rings on Prime's tweets, they wrote out the poem of the One Ring, and in the trailer they included an image of the inscription of the One Ring, and from the synopsis we know that the antagonist will be Sauron. It mentions him sort of discreetly, but it's very obviously him. They mention him as the greatest villain ever to flow from Tolkien's pen, and that, of course, without any context means Sauron or Melkor, and we know it can't be Melkor, so it's really got to be Sauron. And lastly, the profile picture of the show's social media accounts is indeed the inscription of the One Ring. So we've got a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that the show will be all about the forging of the rings. So, John, I really, really agree with what you said a while ago about the first season ending with the forging of the rings. Or even if it doesn't, then it's still going to rotate around all of that stuff.
Yeah, because you see, that's the thing. I mean, technically in the timeline, there's like 100 years between the forging of most of the Rings of Power and then Sauron forging the One Ring. So, you can have the forging of the rings happen earlier in the season. And people are like, this is cool. And everybody knows that Sauron ultimately makes it. So there is this foreboding thing of when's he going to do it? How's he going to do it? What's going to happen? And seeing maybe the reasons behind it and why he ultimately, almost sympathizing with Sauron, where he's like, oh, you went behind my back and forged those 3 greatest elven rings without my help. I don't like you guys anymore. I'm going to, because Sauron's going to be totally camp. But still, just to really explore that finally, the final episode, everybody knows it's coming, but it's like, oh my god, here it comes. He's like, Ashnaz Gdor Bataluk, Ashnaz Gim Patul, Ashnaz Frank Ataluk, Akbor Zomi Shikrim Patul. And you're like, he said the thing.
Wow, amazing. That was amazing. I'll put that in the starting trailer for it to start the podcast and have that. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, I think we can all collectively agree that we would, unless anyone else say different, that I think the forging of the One Ring would be one of the best things to end the first season of the show. Because think about it, I think Ian Penguin, who's not on this podcast today, even mentioned once that it was, think about it, the end of this first season, you have a landscape like a shot going all of the places over Middle-earth, go to Lindon, go to Numenor, and just feel like something's happening. Nobody knows what's happening, but something is happening, except for the people in the region, the Gwyth Aemyrdain, who definitely know what's happening. And just having that sense of tension at the end of season 1 would be great. And also, I'd like to add one thing. So I've had this speculation for a while now, but I've said it before to, I think, Hen personally, but it was that Amazon released 15 actors in January 2020, and then in December 2020 they released about, I think, was it 20 more, so that's 35 actors, and I'm sure we're going to still see maybe 1 or 2 more big names. So I was thinking maybe throughout 2020 they were filming the first 2 episodes, so maybe those actors are only there for the first 2 episodes, and the 20 that came in around about December time. I know some stayed, like Simon Morales, he was in New Zealand the entire time, but most of those actors like Maxime Baudry stayed there for a lot. Arrived in New Zealand in December, so maybe after the 2 pilot episodes, after episode 2, we might see a dramatic time shift and just go further on in history. So yeah, that's what I thought could be a possibility as well. But I think we need to finish this bit off now. So what we have, I think, determined is around somewhere between the year 1200 and 1500 of the Second Age would be a good place to start. And maybe, I know Nikki has preferred some time before then, maybe 500 buys. Ultimately, we'll just have to wait and see what Amazon do, and of course that's going to be quite a while away. But now back to, I'm not sure if it's a problem, so we're ending season 1 with the Forging of the Rings, unless someone wants to counter me. I believe that is around the year 1600 of the Second Age, I believe.
It is.
Yep. So now start season 2, we're in the year 1600 of the Second Age. Now we've got 4 seasons to go. Of course,
Which is exactly why. It's exactly why I don't think it's a good first season finale, because you're not left with a lot of story for 4 seasons.
Oh, there really is. Shall I outline my other 4 seasons?
John, go for
okay.
Where do you go for it? Go.
Yeah.
Right. So season 2 picks up obviously from Sauron now being the One Ring, having the One Ring, and the season 2 is the War of the Elves and Sauron, and the siege of Rivendell, siege of Lindon, and ultimately all things will lead to the climax of season 2 being the Númenóreans coming and saving the day. That is the climax of your season 2. Season 3 will essentially be Game of Thrones on Numenor, where it's all of the, because there's tons of backstabbing, tons, going through, you can maybe go through like 3 different kings by the end of and queens by the end of that season. And season 3 would end with the capture of Sauron. And
Ooh.
then season 4 would essentially be a Calabeth. It would be all of Sauron corrupting the Númenóreans, and ultimately the climax of season 4 would be the destruction of Numenor and the changing of the world. Season 5 would be Arnor, Gondor, Last Alliance. Boom! There's your 5 seasons.
Round
That's
of
awesome.
applause. Round of applause.
You really thought this through. That's amazing.
That's the interesting thing for me. Your season 2 is all of the other 4 seasons, because I don't think that this show will extend at all beyond the Battle of Gwathlo. At all. I think that would be the very end of the 5th season, because I can't see this idea of what maybe it has to do with the fact that I cannot stand anthologies. I would much rather prefer a cyclical series that tells one story across all its seasons, rather than each season being a discrete story on its own. I find that much less dramatically interesting.
I mean, it is an adaptation. It is an adaptation of, and you are always going to be running that very fine line between, being loyal to the source material and making up a whole pile of stuff that loads of people are like, that's not in the book. And that is the major kind of difficulty. Again, the general audience, they'll be like, all right, whatever, as long as it's compelling. And this is the thing that,
which I don't think it will be.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I use Game of Thrones because it was because this is what they're trying to do, is that one thing that really kind of, I think, drove a lot of casual viewers of Game of Thrones was the enthusiasm of people who had read the book. Like leading up to season 3, for example, I'm not going to spoil it, but the big thing that happens in season 3 of Game of Thrones, where you had loads of people who had read the book going, oh my God, it's going to be crazy. And loads of people watching the show going, what's going to happen? I don't know what it is, but it's going to be, oh my God, it happened. And so I think you could have, I think Amazon are hoping that similar relationship between those who have read the books and those who are watching the show can really, and not only that, but you are going to get people reading the books from watching the show, and not only that, but they're going to have a much easier time to do it because there's a lot less to actually read.
Yeah, and you have to remember as well that at least there will be some constant characters. Like there will always be background characters that are changing, but the elves are going to be constant all the way through, and they are the main characters from what we've gathered. So we're going to follow them, and then people are going to come and go. Background cities, they're going to change, they're going to move, but we are going to follow them like we followed Daenerys, Jon Snow, all of these. And that's going to be the constant, which makes the whole thing bind together, like fall together. So it's not going to feel like individual stories being told every season, because there will be some constants.
And it is an interesting kind of juxtaposition between the elves and men as well. How, the men always have that more tendency towards, building and conquering the earth, whereas the elves have a tendency more of kind of living with the earth, although they do have their tendencies towards technology as well, with, say, the Rings of Power. But having the elves watching these generations of men building, and this kind of realization as well, the elves are watching these men getting more powerful, and even there's generations and they're dying off, but they keep coming, and there's almost this kind of powerlessness where the elves are realizing we're yesterday's news, these people are the future. So there's something to be said for that, and just this idea of that a grand city like Minas Tirith, or Minas Anor as it was, that a grand city like that can be built in the space of 2 episodes, because theoretically, because of how it might play with timelines. You train your audience how to watch a show, and so if you establish in early seasons that there are going to be time jumps, and that's okay. the audience, as long as you do it well, the audience will go with it. So by the time you get to season 5 or season 6, they're like, oh yeah, we know how this show works.
Indeed, and I think you've summarized that quite well. And it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, I know. Talk to you when I talk in a second. I'll get around to you. But seeing, I think what we've seen here is that Hen has proposed that we see lift up to around the Battle of the Gothlo and go 5 seasons on that, and then the Forging of the Rings. Well, John has, I think, very well put together a cohesive timeline that can cover the majority of the most interesting parts of the Second Age, and kind of deals with that the lots of years issue, because I really like that bit, because John, wasn't it between, which one was where Sauron was captured and then sent back to Numenor? Which season finale was it?
Sauron gets captured at the end of season 3, so that season has been very heavy on Numenor, and it's this kind of bittersweet victory where the audience who hasn't read the book are like, oh my god, they captured Sauron, wow. But anybody who has read the book is like, oh god. And there can be that really good sense of foreboding, this kind of bittersweet where the season comes to an end and Sauron is in chains, but it's like Loki in Avengers, where he's the one in chains, but he seems to be the only person who wants to be here. And so there's like, what is he up to? And we've seen him do it now. Yeah. We've seen him beguile the elves. So what is he going to do to the corruptible men? He's being taken to an island with these people. And oh God, he is going to tear them apart.
Indeed.
So,
yeah, I think that's a good vessel as well.
That's intriguing.
And yeah, talk to you, going back to you, I know you wanted to mention something as well.
Back to what Hin was saying, and I'm sorry, I'm disagreeing with you a lot, but I don't think this show can end with the Battle of the Gothlo, because it doesn't give much finality at all. If it does end with that, then the best that they can do is like a cliffhanger. I definitely think that the Battle of the Gothlo will be a season end. I think that's one of the few things that probably 80% of fans will agree will be a season end. But there's just no way it can be the series end. Because if the show is going to be all about the Forging of the Rings, and again, we've got pretty good evidence that it will be, that's really the only subject that we actually have evidence for. You can't really just show the rings being made and then Sauron getting whooped in the Battle of the Gothlo and almost dying. In a matter of fact, they could even sort of tease us and make us think that Sauron is dead. But again,
that's a good point.
That wouldn't make much sense in a series end. It would make sense in a season end. But if it is going to be about the Forging of the Rings, you absolutely have to show the death of Sauron in the War of the Last Alliance.
But the War of the Last Alliance has nothing to do with the Forging of the Ring.
Yeah, go on, Enzo.
But then what's the...
They're saying, go on, Enzo. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say that the Forging, the War of the Last Alliance has nothing to do with the Forging of the Rings. It has all to do with the downfall of Numenor, but nothing to do with the Forging.
But it does, though.
Yeah, it's the result of the Forging of the Rings.
Like,
because if the rings weren't made...
End. Yeah.
It's and not only that, but it is at the Battle of Dagorlad that the One Ring is taken from Sauron. So it's all there. It's completely there. It is the crux of the entire thing.
No,
yeah, because the whole point of the rings.
Let me talk. If we go by this reasoning, then we need to extend it all the way to the Third Age, because it's during the Third Age that the ring is finally destroyed.
But we've seen that in the multi-award-winning movie trilogy.
Okay, when I joined Hen, is that I also think that the thing is, the Second Age is it's divided in 4 parts. There is the beginning, in which nothing interesting except Aldarion and Erendis, which is a personal tale, happen. There is the Forging of the Rings between 1200 1700s, and then you jump all the way down to the downfall of Numenor, etc. And in between these 2 events, there are no real stories. Yeah, there is Tar Elmar. We know that the Númenóreans do some conquering. We know that Galadriel turns Lorien into Lothlorien. but we don't really have any big scale story like the downfall of Numenor, the War of Last Alliance, etc. So how will we building things in here?
Well,
Who are who will
once
read
you've got,
this?
well, that's the thing. Once you've gotten to season 4, you have an audience. Season 1, it's like chances are this is going to be successful, but if it's bad, then it's going to die a death. But if it's not able to bring in the casual viewer, then it is also going to struggle, particularly with the budget that it is spending. It cannot afford to not be the biggest show ever in its viewership. And so
why,
and so if it is that big, then it can do whatever it wants with season 4. If season 4 is entirely the fall of Numenor, people will be on board for that, because at that point, people will know who the Númenóreans are. People will care who the Númenóreans are, in the same way as people bought into the mythology and the history of Westeros and Game of Thrones. People will buy into it. You just have to sell it to them.
Sure,
I don't think so.
Downfall of Numenor, but the downfall of Numenor, between the Battle of Guathlo and the downfall of Numenor, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and many
It's like
kings and
7
many characters.
Númenórean generations.
And this
Yes,
is
and
why
not
I say be prepared for either massive time jumps or for them to just wipe away those centuries. Like, this is what happens in adaptation, lads. This is how showrunners work. This is how writers work, where they're like, okay, cool, that's fine. It's a couple of 100 years in the book, but we want to condense this story, so let's just get rid of those couple of 100 years. And we will make it work. That's how these decisions get made. In the same way, in the book, someone has 5 children. In the TV show, they have 3 children, because those last 2, they're not important to the story. Let's not complicate it any further. And that's the way these decisions get made. And they're made for the casual audience. They're made to make sure that they get that audience.
Which is exactly why the casual viewer will not, under any circumstances whatsoever, accept a show that jumps time every 2 episodes at best. Game of Thrones was a fantastic example. The entire storyline of Game of Thrones is 7 years in the world of the story. We are talking here about a story that takes 3,000 years. Of course, some of the characters live for 300 years, but it's still generations upon generations of characters. It just won't work from a dramatic standpoint at all.
But you have people who are used to anthology shows, say the likes of Black Mirror, where every single episode is a complete standalone episode. You have
Black Mirror,
you have that opportunity to be able to have sort of standalone episodes with the through line of the elves always there.
I mean, that's what Marvel tried to do with its comics, and it just ends up in reboots and reboots and endless. You can't blend in serials with cyclical narration or with standalone, because you gave the example of Black Mirror. Black Mirror doesn't really have a main thread. It's themes upon one theme, one episode, one theme, one episode, one theme, one episode, one theme, one problematic. But that's not that's not Lord of the Rings on Prime. Lord of the Rings on Prime is a series about and not very detailed narrative, but a narrative nonetheless. We know the main characters.
But I mean,
what happened.
But they did it in Lord of the Rings. There's a 17-year gap where Frodo sits on his ass, waiting to leave the Shire.
Yes.
And they were
Still,
like,
the
no,
whole
we
story
need
is
more
one
urgency.
generation of characters.
Yes.
But I like. Don't get me wrong. I totally agree with you that it will be a challenge for the showmakers to make this work, but I think it's a really interesting opportunity for them to tell a different type of story rather than just telling and as I said, you train your audience in the first couple of episodes, and they will you lay out the rules very early on, and the audience will be there for it. In the exact same way, like we all people who watched WandaVision where people were like, okay, cool. Every week it's a new sitcom era. You train your audience how to watch the show, and so if it's a well enough constructed, well enough put together piece, then the audience will buy it. And once the audience are in, once the audience are hooked, then you can really, really begin to do it. And they're like, okay, I get this now. I know how this works. One person watching the first episode of Game of Thrones, and they're like, there's so many characters. And by, season 4, they're like, oh my God, Jon Snow. Oh my God, Daenerys. Oh my God, they know, and that's the thing. You have to trust your audience, but also you have to guide your audience. It's this really, really fun balancing act between trusting your audience and guiding your audience, but you don't want to spoon feed them, but you don't want to, sit them at a massive banquet and say, okay, now you have to know exactly how to consume this in all the correct etiquette possible, like it's
sure.
Yeah.
But
I have to say, I'm looking at the character descriptions, and all the characters that we think or even know are human are still, they have options for all the seasons. They're all series regulars. And so that would seem to not jive with this idea of a semi-anthological series that covers millennia at the blink of an eye, because
and that's if those character names are actually true, because in the past, Night Edge Media have incorrectly done the Game of Thrones one, but Night Edge Media could still be correct, but of course that is somebody with that, and I think that is a good place to wrap up this bit of the conversation, lads and ladies, because I think you all both put a point in your points really well. I think the main argument here is, do we end with the Battle of Gothlo? And I agree with what Gallifane said with that. Is that really a big show ending? Will you have 5 seasons to just see the Battle of Gothlo? May that be a bit just not that exciting? Or with unless I think what John said, go all the way to season 5 using I think the capture of Anatar as a vessel, as a way to jump forward a few millennia to get to that final bit. But then Hen has also put together quite well why maybe that might be a bit difficult, and maybe it's easy to have a cohesive narrative that covers much less years. And I hope, have I covered that quite well?
Yeah. Pretty well.
Well done.
That was a really entertaining.
It was a wonderful adaptation of our suggestions.
And I'm sure I'm going to target these next few questions at Nikki and Gallifane, because I'm sure you not had as much to say. So I think we've hit that point now of where we're going to end the show. So the thing is, Gallifane, do you think there is a possibility to have potentially intertwining storylines? I know we've mentioned this earlier, but maybe at the end of potentially season 4, season 5, we could start to see that breakaway to maybe potentially either the spin-off, or potentially they could somehow, maybe if we are seeing the War of the Lost Lines in season 5, we could see maybe some little subtle things to the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit film trilogies. Do you think that could be possible?
Yeah, I'm not really sure what kind of spin-offs we could see. That does seem to support, I don't remember exactly who it was, but someone suggested that they end at the Battle of the Gothlo. Ken, I believe it was you, actually.
Indeed.
And then they pick up the rest of the events of the Second Age with a spin-off series. And that would kind of make sense. But yeah, I guess the Witch King and the Arnor thing, that could be a spin-off series. And as for the subplot thing, the original question you asked me, yeah, I think we'll see a wide variety of subplots and stuff, but we can't really see that many. I mean, we're gonna see some stuff with the Númenóreans, or we might not if they do end with the Battle of the Gothlo. But I think in the end, the Númenóreans, they're not really that important at all until the Battle of the Gothlo and after that. So we'll see a little bit of stuff in Numenor because they still are pretty important. even if it's just mostly after the battles of Gwathlo. And then as for like the elves of Mirkwood, I mean, they don't do really anything, honestly. They do a little bit of stuff. The elves of Lindon, they're pretty important. We'll see some stuff there. But I think what the elves of Lindon do, it's like pretty early in the Second Age when they turned down Sauron in the year 1000, actually. That's pretty important, but then there's no conflict or anything like that that happens there. And after the death of Celebrimbor, there's tons of battles and stuff like that. And I think that will all be part of the main plot line. Let's see, we've also got the Elves of Eregion. That's going to be the main plot line, I believe.
Moria.
Yep, Moria as well, which was, Moria is practically in Eregion. I think technically it's not, but it's like
I think there's a road
right.
connecting
Okay, so
the
The next door neighbor.
it's like right out. It's kissing Eregion.
Yeah, and also, yeah, I think you've covered with subplots quite well, and I think I want to start up a discussion in the second about what could be the filler between this show. But before Nikki, where would you, without no Ken, Enzo, John, Galifay, no one can interfere. Nikki, where do you want this show to end?
The Battle of the Last Lions. It makes sense. Like, it brings it right up underneath where the movie started, which is the only thing that to me makes enough sense. Unless they want to spend billions of dollars more on doing spin-offs, which could be great, but I also think they're spending so much money on this show that they need to make it compelling enough. Yeah.
So yeah, luckily no one else got involved in that one, so that's good. So now I want to push us back a bit, all the way maybe back to season 2. So let's say I know Ken disagreed, but with the ending with Ken, which season or which time period in the show would you like to see the One Ring being forged?
I'm trying to think because the logic would be that it would be like season almost, I would think 3, and then you could do season 4 could be like the siege of Rivendell. That's pretty much a pretty low point in the war. And then season 5 is the big push. It eventually ends with the big push aided by the Númenóreans and climaxing in the Battle of Gwathlo. And then the spin-off would be a Calabath and the Last Alliance, which are pretty close. So you can do them as a single generation.
Yeah.
So that's where that's the structure that I have in my mind. And so you do have 3 seasons of just the characters kind of schmoozing around and kind of lots of like scheming in a region and that sort of thing.
And I think we can proceed. I think first season is going to be 8 episodes, and the second, third, fourth, fifth between 8 and 10 probably. So John, with your plan, so would the fall of Eregion and the siege of Rivendell and Gil-galad send the troops in aid? So that would happen in season 2, if I'm correct.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, the season 2 would be the war of the elves and Sauron, and so you'd have all of that, and that would climax with the Númenóreans saving the day.
Yeah.
And the elves kind of realizing, maybe we aren't the top dogs anymore. That can be the beginning of that.
So if, say, season 2 is 10 episodes, then do you think that is enough time to tell that cohesively and have a good narrative while also having stuff going on in the background as well? For example, in Numenor. So what would Numenor be doing in that second season? Because I don't think that's what I'm getting around, because we know Numenor's going to be a big bit of the show, but I think if that time period Numenorians call for aid, so what else would be happening in Numenor unless we have to create some subplots?
Well, I mean, there would be there would be a lot of invention, because
Yes,
the way that Tolkien has a lot of that written, it's like first this guy became king, then this guy became king, and then this one became a queen, and then this guy became king. So there can be a lot played with that, and there's a lot of world building opportunities there, because what you can do, and this is where you might get away with not having a prologue, is that they can, talk about their relationships with the relationship that they have with the elves and how they are partially descended from the elves. Like Elros was him and Elrond. I always find that hilarious how Aragorn and Arwen are like distant
Oh
cousins.
yeah.
But like there you can really play on a lot of the elves wanting Numenor to come and help. So you can have elvish emissaries coming to Numenor, and so you can begin to really play on some of the discrimination against the elves, and the differentiation between with the faithful, the Elendili, who are kind of more loyal to the elves in comparison to other Númenóreans. So like there's a lot of that kind of stuff that you're really then starting to sow the seeds for later seasons as well. Because this is the thing as well. This is how you tell a really particularly a really good kind of TV show is that you're constantly laying seeds for later storylines, and certain ones will blossom and certain ones will be probably forgotten about, but you're always laying seeds and seeing what takes root.
Yeah.
I don't really agree on having the seeds of the conflict between Kingsmen and Faithful in the first seasons. Numenor there is definitely an element of fall from grace in Numenor's story, and if we don't put them in a high point, in a pedestal at the beginning, we will lose something when they start becoming corrupted. That's
100%.
like,
Yeah.
I hear a lot of people saying that we should show them the difference between them, but I'm on the opposite side. The first season they should be friendly with elves. They should be agreeing. The seeds of evil and corruption should show a bit later. Like sure, maybe Telperion is apathetic. She is indifferent, not apathetic. Is indifferent towards elves, but she doesn't hate them.
Yeah,
because
absolutely. Like I mean, it's something that you would do gradually. Like you wouldn't have them, be Tara Farazan straight off. It would be subtle, and if done effectively, it would be done subtly. But again, you're just laying those little seeds of, they didn't go to aid right away. And because then what you can have is this wonderful moment where you're still wondering whether or not the Númenóreans will actually will actually help the elves. Because what you could do is, rather than them just choosing, no, we're not going to help the elves, that they have a genuine reason. Maybe there's a pestilence on Numenor, or there's some difficulty on Numenor that they can't spare any aid. But then finally, whenever the elves are in their darkest hour, the ships come ashore, and you're like, oh my god, Numenor did come, just like Rohan showing up at the Battle of Pelennor Fields.
Yeah, and that could be
right. There is another thing that should be made clear, is that Numenor is paradise. Like it should be the closest thing to paradise in Middle Earth, because there needs to be the sense that these guys already have so much, but they still want more. Because because Númenóreans, they don't get sick, they live long. Erendis lays out pretty clearly how lucky these guys are, and it should be shown. The viewer should feel that these guys aren't jealous of elves. They are simply arrogant. They are delusional. They already have everything, and they want even more.
Indeed, and that's a really good point. It'd be interesting to see how Amazon will represent Numenor in general as well, because there have been so many discussions. Some we're not going to get into, for example, like what race will there be, what historical in the past. Actually, that's a great, interesting question, John. So with Numenor in the past, which historical setting or type of place, like Rome, etc., would you think Numenor should be based off if we had to base it off something?
Well, I suppose the Rome or even for ancient Greece is a very good kind of basis for that, because again you're tapping into the Atlantean mythology, where, I mean, Numenor is essentially Tolkien's Atlantis.
Mm-hmm.
And in that same way, it is this high society that, fell from grace and fell into the ocean. That, yeah, having them loosely based, like this is what at least the films anyway did very effectively, where, say, like the Rohirrim, I mean, were very, very obviously like Anglo-Saxon, but say like the Gondorians, for example, where, they had so many different design aesthetics going on, but it really worked well. And I think that's what good production design does, is blends a lot of those, a lot of the historical designs into something new. Again, geez, I keep going back to Game of Thrones, but they did it really well. And their designs and how they were able to take loads of different designs from the real world and turn them into something completely unique and yet feels totally believable. So I would say ancient Greece would be a very solid kind of, because again, with your audience, there's a lot of shorthand that the audience should be able to pick up on, and very quick, like, don't be surprised if there's loads of pillars in if there's loads of pillars in Numenor, because even consciously or subconsciously, people will be like, I get it. It's,
yeah, we're putting
it's
some
like
pictures
Greece.
on screen right
Or
now. Yeah.
or even with Rome, which started as a republic and fell from grace and became an empire, So, and that's an even more powerful thing, with regards to Numenor's ultimate fate. So there's a lot of things. Again, going back to what Tolkien said, it's not about allegory, it's about applicability. And that's why his work works so well, is that it's not a one-to-one correspondence. It's echoes of this, echoes of that, but altogether, it makes a new story. And there's just as many echoes of the ancient Romans in Numenor as there is in modern day, and various countries fall from grace. So it's something that can be applied, and that's why Tolkien's work continues to be so relevant.
Yeah, that's a really good argument for that. And while we are on the topic of Númenóreans, Nikki, do you think there is a possibility? Well, I'm not even a possibility. How emphasized will the colonialization and of Numenor be in the show? For example, all the ports they do set up in Middle-earth or down the south mainly. Do you think that should be a big thing that's emphasized by Amazon in the show?
Not necessarily a big thing, but it's a way to bridge the gap between the different worlds. It's a way to bridge the gap and between the characters. Like Daenerys eventually. Like I keep drawing the lines with Game of Thrones too, but they did it really well. Like John said,
Bezos
basically
said it
they did the
himself.
storyline very well. Yeah. Like Daenerys eventually had to go across the water and get to the other characters to continue the storyline. I believe that this is a very good way to show the connection between the two. I think in the beginning it will be very separate, and then we will follow people across. We will see the colonies. We will see the initial skepticism, the initial like worshipness, the initial everything, both with humans and elves and dwarves and the Númenóreans. And I think it will be fascinating. I'm looking forward to seeing like more developed characters from Numenor as well, that we don't really read that much about in the books. Like, I think they have more freedom there than they will, for instance, with Galadriel. So I think that will be very cool to see. But yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah. And in Numenor, anyways, as you mentioned, we're going to, of course, have to see some new characters within Numenor. Maybe some of the court, maybe some servants for maybe like Tartel Perianos, something like that. So, but that leads on to another question, Talking Tube. Do you think actually, if I was to ask you to give me a ratio, like 1 to 2, something like that, of how much of the show should be, or how much of the seasons should be new, fresh concept, and how much should be just basically describing what Tolkien said and sticking to the lore. For example, having the full of the sacking of Eregion for like 4 episodes is Saint Tolkien's lore, but maybe if Amazon go in a new direction for 1 episode with something that was never mentioned by Tolkien but does make sense, but that is still technically new content. So if you were to give me a ratio, maybe even like how much you want 40% of the show to be new content and new, yeah, basically, yeah.
I think the vast majority of it will be completely new stuff. If I was going to make an analogy, I'd say that Tolkien's works on the Second Age, for the most part, we've got like a couple of lines of dialogue, not even like a full page worth of dialogue in the entirety of the Second Age. I'd say that Tolkien's outline is like the bricks, and everything that Amazon is going to have to do is going to be the mortar. They're going to have to fill in all the gaps. And the issue is there is a lot of gaps, a lot of huge gaps. We see, again, like bricks, we see all the heavy important stuff in his outlines, but we have almost no dialogue. We don't have any specifics at all. We don't even know that well what Celebrimbor looks like. We know a little bit about it, but still, we don't know that much stuff at all. So I'd say probably at most 70% of the stuff is going to be completely new, but it's not going to be big things that are new. It's going to be smaller things like how Gil-galad speaks, or how Celebrimbor, like, how big is his nose, stuff like that, or how he speaks, accent, styles, stuff like that, or
And like
yeah,
even
smaller
stuff
things
like,
like
yeah,
that.
like I'm
Things that
talking
wouldn't
about,
necessarily disagree with the
yeah.
canon.
And then, like, for example, Tolkien never mentioned in the Second Age that Gil-galad went to and met Oropher of the Woodland Realm, but still that's not contradicting Tolkien's lore, because that could have easily happened during the Second Age. Those two could have easily met, but maybe just Tolkien right apart. So that's the type of stuff I think Amazon could go for.
Yeah.
But
And Chippy says a little bit of stuff about that. He says, quote, "It's necessary to remain Tolkienian. So they're going to be faithful to what Tolkien wrote, again, the bricks, but then it will also be necessary to answer questions such as, like, what was Sauron doing early in the Second Age, stuff like that, and specifics. And that stuff actually kind of has to be filled in. And I know a lot of Tolkien purists, and I'd say I'm a Tolkien purist, really. I strongly dislike it when they go against the canon. They don't like the idea of inventing new characters, but unfortunately, that's something that really has to be done. You're going to have new characters, or you're going to have to break the canon and link them together. You're just going to have to sort
It's just
of
going to read
blend
like a
the
history
material
book.
we see.
yeah, go on, John. You were saying something?
Yeah, or it's just going to read like a history book.
Yeah.
You know, it'll, you know, if in the way that a lot of the source material does, of the Second Age, reads like a history book, reads like just a basic chronology of it. So I mean, but I totally agree that that Amazon are going to be coming up with a mortar. I think absolutely. But what is really intriguing and very exciting for myself as a Tolkien fan is that as much as we know all of the stories and all of the outline of and all of the ultimate what is going to happen, seeing the motivations behind certain things could actually be really interesting, and seeing the motivations of certain characters and the decisions. I mean, obviously they will not be Tolkien's words, but they will be the inventions of these new writers. But still, it'll be an interesting exploration in a similar way to, say, the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance TV show. Oh my God, one of the best shows ever. It's fantastic. We know, having seen the film, how it's all going to end up, but at the same time, we're watching this show, hoping that these little gelfling are going to defeat the Skeksis. We know they're not. Spoilers. But we know they're not. We know it's not going to happen. And in fact, So I think there's a lot that the writers can play with our emotions, with fans' emotions, where we know what's going to happen. We just might not necessarily know exactly how it's going to happen. And
Indeed.
that is super exciting.
Yeah, and there's lots of room for invention, as you have suggested as well. And while we are talking about subplots, Shane, I think you mentioned in the chat earlier. Would you want to give us one of the Númenóreans ones?
Yeah, the Numenor, essentially, as I see it, while the elves have their thing going on with the rings, there are two main story threads to do with Numenor at that time. One is in the court of the queen, Telperion, which is basically an argument as to whether to help the elves or not. That's pretty simple, kind of the sort of stuff we've seen with Thranduil, we've seen it with Treebeard. The other one is the antecedents of Numenorian occupation of Middle-earth, which at this time aren't in the far south. They're in Londare, in Enedwaith. So it's a thing. It's to do with, and it's important for later in the show as well, because it's Londare from where an army of Numenorian comes to help the elves. But also, we do believe from the character descriptions that Amazon is going to heighten this by bringing in a couple of Middle-earth natives, Guathurim characters,
Yeah.
one of which is going to have an affair with a Numenorian. That seems pretty clear from the character descriptions and from the auditions as well.
Yeah, and
So,
one thing
yeah.
you've mentioned there was that opportunity to not even match, connect Numenor and Middle-earth together. And Nikki, I'm sorry if this sounds like maybe putting you on the spot a bit, but what ways could you possibly think of Amazon making up ways of, or maybe even something you remember from the lore as well, from connecting Middle-earth to Numenor as well? Because I think you did mention as well that with, of course, Game of Thrones, they had Daenerys and I think what's the East Continent, I think. I don't remember the name of it.
That's what.
Yeah, Essos with the West. I'm guessing it's Westeros then, isn't it? Is it Westeros the other one?
Yeah.
Yep. So having, or would you rather think Amazon should have it like they did it in Game of Thrones, where few seasons, maybe one or two references to each other, but leave them off for the first, maybe, of course, intervention between the two continents would happen more earlier, but still, should there be different ways Amazon could connect the two nations together?
I absolutely think that the neatest way they can do it, or the most tidy way, would be to tell both storylines sort of alongside each other, with you like maybe having one episode focused mainly on one character and then one focusing mainly on another. And then you can have sort of hints or um, stuff that's being dropped in conversation that hints at them being aware of each other's existence in a way, or referring to the past, or referring to, news of newly discovered shore, news of newly discovered people, stuff like that. And then eventually you follow some of them across the sea, and then you tie it sort of together. The other option is, of course, that they choose to focus one season just on the elves in Middle Earth, and then one season just on the Númenóreans, and then eventually sort of, bam, mash it all together, by having one of the season about the Númenóreans finish off with them sailing over to set up, to explore, or them escaping from a sinking Numenor. Yeah, it really depends on where they start and what stories they choose to tell, but I think that's the way they do it, by having characters from Numenor come across to Middle Earth and be meeting some of the main characters in one way or another.
Indeed, I think you have summarized that quite well. And Gallifane, quickly, this is your 2 minute warning to put a picture of, quote that picture of Russell Crowe in chat. So, that's your 2 minute heads up. Okay, back to the point. John, do you think in your planned narrative, do you think there is leeway really in the episodes? Because what you've done is in each season put lots of it together, not really like chronology series as such, but like the fall of Regan happened this much. This has to be completed by this season. Do you think there is in that possible? And say there's only 10 episodes, 8 episodes in a season, maybe
Yeah.
being 50 to an hour, 50 minutes to an hour long. Is there leeway to have Amazon could give themselves time to add in new stuff, or would that potentially be quite jarring?
Oh no, I mean there's loads of space for adding stuff because as I say these are only plot outlines, and so these would be the major A plot, whereas you can have all sorts of B plot going on because one thing you'll notice about these plot layouts, it doesn't involve any dwarves, but the dwarves are there. So like there can be all sorts of very, I mean you could have silly things, or just kind of seemingly mundane things, or just little day in the life of a dwarf, that you could totally, that's the beauty of TV, that it has space to breathe. And so, if it really wants to, it could take an entire episode, focus it on a dwarf and the dwarf's perspective of of the story that you're seeing, And so there is tons and tons of space to really really play about with it. It doesn't have to follow too many rules. As I said, it sets its own rules in the first season, and after that, it can do what it wants as long as it does it well.
Indeed, yeah, you said that really well. And John, this is your warning now. If you want to quickly go into the Council of Fans chat and just open that up for a second, and you'll see the picture there. So if you could quickly do that, please.
Oh,
And yep. So
yeah.
and then, but then while we see John, let John look at that. I'm going to say this to Enzo. So, in your opinion, I know you're quite opinionated on this. Just to wrap up, where should season 5 end? Maybe Enzo's fallen asleep. Maybe,
No,
maybe.
no. It's just that the question is, well, 5 seasons seems like a bit too long to tell the story of the Forging of the Rings. If we stick to the story of the Forging, I would join Hen something after the Battle of Guathlo. Probably the funerals of Celebrimbor or something like that.
Potentially. I think John, have you seen that picture in chat?
I have, yes.
So what we do with all our guests, I think we started this with Voice of Geekdom Dan. We say Russell Crowe has been rumored to be playing in the show, so we just want to know what character do you think, or what race Russell Crowe could be playing in the Amazon show if he is involved. Because actually, he was cast. He's apparently cast in I think the new Thor, Love and Thunder, like about yesterday. So yeah, but who do you think he could play as of right now?
Well, based on that photograph, I would imagine he could be. It'd probably be a dwarf, and I think he could actually play. He could be really good as a dwarf. I think the actor has enough humility at this stage of his career to go, yeah, no, I could play a dwarf, and happily bow down from being, the king of kings or whatnot. That being said, I mean, he could totally be a decadent high king of Numenor. So, there are a lot of options, but based on that photo, and also I think he would be really interesting as a dwarf. I think it would be something interesting for him as an actor to explore, because he does a lot of very similar stuff, and I think that could actually be quite fun for him.
Indeed. And of course, I think we can all agree here. If Russell Crowe from 15, 20 years ago, he'd be able to be cast in the show in so many different places. So yeah, just
Absolutely.
now, yeah, agree. But
he had read for Boromir. No?
Yeah, it would be interesting to see Russell Crowe as Boromir. I always thought Liam Neeson would be a good Boromir, just with that voice. I see a Gondorian voice, but yeah, I think we are just about near the end now. So, what I like to normally do at the end, just go one by one down the chat and just ask. So, in this season, what do you think is the most important thing Amazon should do in this show throughout 156? Something so integral that they can't leave out. So, I'm gonna start with John. Just anything.
A moment that they can't leave
Yeah,
out,
a
or just
moment or a
something that they
thing they
need to
do,
do.
etc. Anything, a moment, could be a moment, anything that you want to happen the
Really,
most.
really solid world building
Hmm.
in the early episodes, and to not be overly heavy. Like it's again such a fine balancing act, but to be able to be really tidy with their writing, that every single line, every single visual is doing more than one thing in telling the story and building this world, and bringing the audience into this world.
Indeed. Chen,
What's the question again?
one thing Amazon have to do no matter what with the show, one thing you want within this season, it could be an event, it could be just a thing like John said, like would just like good writing for the first episodes, anything.
Within the whole of the series, or within
Just in
this?
general, anything you want Amazon to do.
I really think that the tragedy of Celebrimbor is in the heart of all of this, and I think that would be, this show had done, and this franchise had done a couple of good tragic characters. Boromir, I would suggest Thorin as well. So yeah, good old fashioned kind of big tragedy with Celebrimbor, that's vital.
Indeed, yeah, we haven't even mentioned Celebrimbor in this episode, but yeah, he's vital to the story as well, and I'm sure in John's plan. But then moving on to Enzo.
For the show, you see that scene where Celebrimbor is getting brought before Sauron, and then he puts him on a table and he brings out a saw and he starts sawing his hands. I want to see this.
Ooh.
That'd be a
Yeah,
very interesting.
torture.
It'd be interesting to
I
see if
want to see
Amazon go
torture.
all out.
Well, if they don't do, I will write. I will post a rant on Reddit.
Well, Enzo, you did say on the last one that you were a fan of, was it Hell Worship or something? Something along those lines. So yeah, I want to put it past you. And then, of
No.
course, on to,
Oh yes,
yeah,
that's a bit much Melkor.
yeah, but that was for last week's one
I
now.
love this guy.
But on to Gallifrey now. Gallifrey, unless I think maybe his mic's muted or something. If not, I think that's about it then. So, first of all,
Hey, don't
Nikki?
I have to say anything?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Are you gonna skip me again? Damn it. Yeah. Least loved
well,
everywhere. No, I'm
Talking Tube got
kidding.
it last podcast, to be fair. I didn't mention him for
Yeah.
15 minutes. It's
It's all good.
it's what happens when you
It's all
have.
good.
I thought Nick had already spoken, my bad. So yeah, Nikki, what do you want the most?
Well, you all know that I'm a big fan of character development, so I would love for them to not rush that and take their
Yeah.
time in building characters, building relationships, and gaining people's trust. Like, get the viewers to love these characters, to hate them, to want to keep
Mhm.
coming back, to almost form teams to fight against. Some people love Anatar, some people love Galadriel, some people love Celebrimbor. And also, I would love for them to be so into that part of it that they leave like little bits and pieces for the people who haven't read the books to be like later on, be like, oh, that's why they did that. Oh, that makes sense. Tie it all together, build it up because the characters and the actors who play the characters are going to carry a whole lot of this show. You have to give them something to work with, and something for people to love. So yeah.
Indeed, yeah.
Well
Uh,
said.
yeah, go on, John.
Oh yeah, well said. Absolutely.
Amazing. And finally, Talking Tube.
I would add now.
I think it seems like you are having some connection issues there, but I think that just about wraps up today's episode one. It's been really fun. First of all, thank you, John, for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
I hope Hen and Enzo haven't scared you off too much.
Oh no, don't worry.
That's what happens when you have two historians on a podcast and Enzo. I'm only just kidding, Enzo. And also, but as usual, thank you to everyone else. Thank you, Nikki.
Namari.
Thank you, Enzo.
Thank you.
I would say thank you to Tolkientube, but he has just said now that his laptop has died. So, good riddance to him. Thank you also to Hen, as usual.
Always a pleasure.
And of course, all of John's links will be in the description. Please do check him out. As you can see just from today's podcast, he, along with, has an excellent idea of Tolkien, and also there's other history related stuff. And as he said at the start, he does lots of different things as well. But thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. Please like and subscribe. But until the next podcast, my friends, goodbye.